There's the one. All right. Well, good morning and welcome to El Paso Bible Church, our Sunday school hour. We're in the book of Numbers this morning. So if you want to turn in your Bibles to Numbers 24, right? We're going to review a little bit, but Numbers 24 is where we're at. And it's actually a pretty important chapter, even in the New Testament, I think, to explain one of the descriptions, I think, that we have there. But you remember Balaam. Balaam was, in his day, a rock star among prophets, apparently. Balaam from Peor. And so he was asked, as the Israelites were wandering through the desert and came to be in a place of concern for the kingdom of Moab at the time. Not Moab, Utah, right? You don't go there to do your four-wheel driving, but this is Moab in the ancient Near East. And Balak, the king there, asked him if he would, for payment, rich payment, nearly, I don't know, enough payment, it sounds like, to create a dynasty, almost. I mean, like to be, not just enough money for his lifetime, but to basically set his entire clan of descendants for generations with wealth, if he would just come and curse Israel. And so we talked about that, the nature of cursing, right? And I've told you that I have been cursed repeatedly. not just naughty words, you know what I mean, right? That may God strike you dead. When you stand before the pearly gates, God will refuse you entrance in here because you have not supported women's reproductive rights, blah, 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 blah. Yada, yada, yada. I don't care. Those people, it doesn't matter to me that happens when people curse me like that because they don't have any power, right, to do that. But there was evidently something going on here where they had a reason to believe that if Balaam pronounced a curse on someone, that it would be so. He doesn't seem to be even a monotheist here, which is kind of a problem. He understands even perhaps that Yahweh is the highest God, and that he can be implored, that he can be approached, that he can get communication from him. And you remember, of course, that he was sought after several times by Balak. He sent people, emissaries to him twice. And then he finally goes to Yahweh, and Yahweh says, okay, well, if they're going to keep coming after you, go ahead and go with them, but you can only say what I'm going to say. You can only say what I'm going to tell you to say. And then we have this instance, I flipped one slide too far, I think. This one, right, where he's on the poor little donkey here. They always make the donkey look little and cute, and the man look huge. Did you notice that in the pictures of Balaam and the donkey? The donkey, you're really supposed to be sympathetic to the donkey. The donkey is carrying this guy that is bigger than the angel with the sword in front of him, physiologically. It is designed to create empathy. Why? We don't see inside of his head, but I think that it's logical to assert, or at least to speculate, that Balaam had a second thoughts about what he was going to do and say when he got to Balak. And that God knew what his intentions turned out to be on the journey, that he was, in fact, being tempted by the money, by the wealth. And so, you know that story, that the donkey saves his life, essentially, and he's sitting there beating the donkey, and it becomes a sin for him. So he comes, right? He comes to Balak. He's given the opportunity from multiple locations, right? As if this is a real estate problem, right? Y'all, anybody ever been? I've been a real estate agent in my life for a short while, kind of a non-standard. That shouldn't surprise you. I was a non-standard real estate agent. I did not go show people curtains and paint colors and junk like that. We did investing in properties, and so a little bit different than that. But it's all about location, right? They say. Location, at least commercial real estate, right? The same building a quarter mile away, one on the corner and one in the back lot, you could pay 10 times as much for the one on the corner. That's how Balak seems to approach this. He's like, well, we're going to offer the bulls and the rams, and we're going to build 7 altars to Yahweh over here, and we're going to try this one out. And then that doesn't work. Balak blesses Israel. And so he said, well, no. Maybe the problem is location. Maybe we need to go over here. Maybe so you can't see how beautiful and how big and how expansive the camp is. Let's go over here. And maybe you can curse them from over here if you see the ugly part of the camp. How about that? If you go see the part that's over here. And so they build 7 altars. They get 7 rams. They get 7 bulls, and they sacrifice. And Balaam blesses Israel again. And so Balak gets upset. I mean, he's not getting his money's worth, right? By the way, this does happen to people in vocational ministry pretty frequently. Over the long haul, you get people that try to wave money in your face to get you to agree with them on occasion. The answer is no. Actually, Balaam has a correct answer, right? The answer is, I'm going to say what Yahweh says to say, and y'all can pound sand, right? That's not very pastoral sounding to you, is it? But that's what we're saying. We don't usually go to the pound sand part. We stop it. I'm going to say what God says to say, and that's what we're going to say. So that happens. That's his answer. So he keeps moving them around, and finally he says, just shut up. Don't bless them or curse them, right? Balak says to Balaam, and so here we are in chapter 24. Balaam comes, and it says of him that he sees that it's God's intent to bless Israel, right? And that's verse 1 of chapter 24. So Balaam no longer needs to go. So what happens is, just like if he's approaching Baal Peor, if he's approaching Molech or whatever else, any of the ancient Near Eastern gods, he goes to them and he sacrifices, trying to propitiate their wrath, so he has entrance into their presence. And then he goes and seeks an omen. He goes and tries to receive a word from them, separate from the bloodshed that has just taken place. But in chapter 24, verse 1, he sees what Yahweh is intending to do, and he doesn't have to go and do that. He doesn't go and do the sacrifice. He doesn't go see the omens. He just sets his face towards the wilderness, is what it says in verse 1, to where they're camping, right? Because they are out in the wilderness. And it is amazing, right, that we read that God has this intent to bless Israel with this kind of abundance while they are under discipline, right? That's why they're wandering out in the desert. That's why they're in this situation. But Balaam lifts up his eyes and he sees Israel camping tribe by tribe, so they're still being obedient. And the Spirit of God came upon him, verse 2 of chapter 24. And so he does not need to seek an omen. They haven't sacrificed. They haven't done all the things here, but he's still receiving a word from God. And he took up his discourse and said, this is essentially his posture. I think there was a prophetic posture that people expected of others who are doing this. And he said, the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, and the oracle of the man whose eye is opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty falling down, yet having his eyes uncovered. Right, so he's describing himself. He's talking about his position before Yahweh and not before Balak, right? So Balak expected him to submit to the king, not for no reason, for money. Expect him to do that. And he says, I'm actually falling down in front of the Almighty because that's the communication that I'm giving right now. So how fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens beside the river, like aloes planted by Yahweh, like cedars beside the waters. Water will flow from his buckets, and his seed will be by many waters, and his king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. Now think about that image, right? They're out here, they're looking. He lifts up his eyes on Israel that's camping tribe by tribe out in the wilderness. Now the wilderness for you may be something that's just uncivilized, right? When I was in high school, I spent a lot of time in the summers tramping through the jungle. in the rainy season in further down south in Mexico in a part that's very jungly, right? You can call that a wilderness. But in that wilderness, there's water and food everywhere, everywhere. You can get lost, and there are things that can kill you, but you're not going to die of dehydration or lack of nutrition. It's everywhere. When the Bible says that these people are camping out in the wilderness, it's uncivilized. It's also unpopulated. There's no water. There's no agriculture. It's a place to be avoided. And he looks down on these tribes camping out in the wilderness, whether or not he understands their current state as being under discipline by Yahweh. He looks at them, and what he sees, with his eye having been opened, what he sees is what God sees, right? When he sees these people, what his intention is for them. And he sees valleys that stretch out. He sees gardens beside the river, aloes planted by Yahweh, cedars beside the waters. So he's seeing into the future a long way, right? You can grow green beans in a garden by the river in a few weeks, right? But you can't do the same thing, and to make an analogy, you can't do that with the pecan orchards, right? Pecan trees don't grow in a few weeks. Neither do the cedars grow in a few weeks. So he's seeing the big, long picture. He's seeing a massive cultivation, right, of their future and of what is to come for these people. He's seeing cedars planted in this place. He's seeing water will flow from his buckets, right? What is the one confrontation that they've had over and over and over, aside from idolatry? Simply water to drink, right? And it was the pursuit of water that placed a stumbling block in front of Moses so that Moses would now not enter into the promised land in that lifetime anyway. And what brought Aaron to the end of his temporal life. Everybody remembers that that Moses struck the rock twice. Everybody remembers that God tells Moses, you're not going to enter into the promised land in this life. You're going to die out here in the desert with everybody else who has disobeyed me. But we forget that God said, well, take Aaron up on the mountain, and on that mountain he's going to die. As soon as you take off his priestly robes, he's going to die because of the part that he played in that. So we need to remember those things, right? Water is a major confrontation between God and the people. And in the big picture, that's not going to be a problem. His seed will be by many waters, and his king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him out of Egypt. He is for him like the horns of the wild ox. In my whole lifetime, I've never read so many news stories about people getting gored by bovine animals as in the last few weeks. I used to think that my grandfather was being extreme when he said people were getting dumber. I don't think he was wrong exactly. Because have you ever heard about a buffalo goring somebody? Somebody trying to pet one of them? Right? I mean, it happens in the rodeo, right? But there's all sorts of reasons why that might happen in the rodeo. You do that knowledgeably. That's a profession. You might get gored by a bull if you're a bull rider. But people getting gored by these animals, they just start running the bulls in Spain again. People were gored by bulls. It's serious business. Just because something eats vegetables doesn't mean that it's weak. It's not like the human vegans, right? Right? There's a reason that there's not a vegan category in the Mr. Universe competitions, folks. At least I don't think there is. Is there? Has it changed? In a world where we don't know who the women are, I'm not sure. Maybe there's a vegan trans category in the Mr. Universe competitions these days, but I haven't heard of that. Larson, what do you think? You don't know. I didn't know. I thought you might be entering that Mr. Universe competition, but all right. Well, I guess not. I guess we're going to have to live in ignorance at this point because Larson can't help us out. He will devour the nations who are his adversaries, and he will crush their bones in pieces and shatter them with his arrows. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who dares rouse him. Blessed is everyone who blesses you, and cursed is everyone who curses you. So they end, see, I told you I was going to forget to flip slides. Can I still flip slides? There we go. There it is, the repetition of the Abrahamic blessing from this pagan rock star prophet, right? He lifts up his eyes, he looks out on Israel, and he pronounces that same blessing that Abraham received. When Abraham was said, you will be gone for centuries here. Your family will be gone for centuries from here, but this is your land, and everyone who blesses you I will bless, and everyone who curses you I will curse. Then Balak's anger burned against Balaam. He struck his hands together, and Balak said to Balaam, I called you to curse my enemies, but behold, you have persisted in blessing them these 3 times. Therefore, flee to your place now. I said I would honor you greatly, but behold, the Lord has held you back from honor. Balaam said to Balak, did I not tell your messengers whom you had sent me, saying, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything contrary to the command of Yahweh, either good or bad, of my own accord. What Yahweh speaks, I will speak. And now behold, I am going to my people. Come, and I will advise you what this people will do to your people in the days to come. Sounds fairly serious to do this in Balak's house and in his presence. So here's where we stopped. We ran over last week, and I apologize for that. So that's basically review that we spent some time on here. So he takes up his discourse again. Essentially, he takes the prophetic posture, a proclamation posture, and he begins finally with a final discourse, a final oracle. The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eyes opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty falling down, yet having his eyes uncovered. That's all on his business card, right? That's his identification. This is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I am here for. So he sees with his eyes open, he sees what God has granted him to see. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A person, a human, a man. Not here, not present. It is not Moses, it isn't Aaron, it isn't anybody. Well, Aaron's dead. But it's not anybody in the leadership of Israel currently. A star shall come forth from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise from Israel, and shall crush through the forehead of Moab and tear down all the sons of Sheth. The word means tumult, people that were in disorder or disarray. This is an important New Testament image, actually, and it's something that people have argued over quite a lot. When we read about the church at Thyatira, John speaks the words of Jesus to the church, to the angel of the church. There's a few chunks in the chain here. But the message to them is that if you endure, I will grant to you the morning star as a reward, is usually how we would understand that language. And when you go and you look, because this is an issue for people, like one of the things that a lot of people with lots of degrees right now are arguing over is what extent, how can we interpret the way the New Testament uses the Old Testament? Because it was so infused in the New Testament writers for the most part that if you pricked them, they would bleed Old Testament. So it's sometimes kind of hard to figure out what Old Testament passage they're referring to. And this is one of them. The church at Thyatira is promised this morning star as a result of their endurance. But if you look in the Old Testament, some of the most obvious references to the morning star seem to be either to a pagan king or to Satan himself. And that's a possibility. And those are more near references, that it could simply be a reference to Thyatira being granted some sort of authority over Satan. It's not that they're being granted identity, but in that passage it talks about those who are of Satan there, who are his followers or whatever, and so they're given some sort of authority directly over him. I don't think that that's likely, and I think it's likely a reference to this. This was actually understood by ancient Jewish scholars to be a reference, a messianic prophecy out of the mouth of Balaam, which is a unique place to get a messianic prophecy, but these are unique circumstances, right? And so it's this star that shall come forth from Jacob. A scepter shall rise from Israel. It's actually an advancement of their government, right? Because basically right now, this is one huge family reunion, right? They don't have all of the things that are required to be a nation or a people. They have a direct theocratic government, but what happens? We're going to see another incident, right? When they have this direct theocratic government through the proclamation of Moses as a prophet, tens of thousands of people seem to die at the drop of a hat. They don't have possession of their land. They have not embraced the promises that were given yet to Abraham in the land seed, blessing forever is a short term for that. But they're being promised a monarchy, a king to rule over a kingdom. That's what a scepter means. A scepter shall arise from Israel, not just for Israel, but they shall crush through the forehead of Moab and tear down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be a possession. Seir, its enemies, will also be a possession, while Israel performs valiantly. One from Jacob shall have dominion and will destroy the remnant from the city. And he looked at Amalek and took up his discourse. So from his point of view, he can see different nations, right? Different places that people are residing in. It's similar, I think, to Mount Cristo Rey, right? So if you climb up to Mount Cristo Rey, I wouldn't suggest doing this. Apparently people get robbed and bad things happen to them. But if you were to do that, hypothetically, go to Mount Cristo Rey, right? And you go up there, and the whole point of being there is that you're at the corner of Mexico, New Mexico, and Texas. Like, you can see all the way around, and wherever you look, you can see different parts of this region that are under different sovereign control. And so I think that's what he's seeing. And he looked at Amalek and took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his end shall be destruction. And he looked at the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, your dwelling place is enduring, and your nest is set in a cliff. Nevertheless, Cain will be consumed. And how long will Ashur keep you captive? Your dwellings will endure, but you won't, to the Kenites. And then he took up his discourse and said, alas, who can live except God has ordained it? But ships shall come from the coast of Kittim, and they shall afflict Ashur and will afflict Eber, and so they will also come to destruction. Then Balaam arose and departed and returned to his place, and Balak also went his way. Now, this tells you how important of a man Balaam was, right? If an ancient Near Eastern king promises you massive amounts of wealth if you'll simply come and pronounce a curse over a certain tribe, and you come and you tick him off repeatedly, and in fact you end up cursing his own people and his own kingdom and all the kingdoms that are around him, all of his allies, essentially, right? At least at the level of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? They may not be friendly, but everybody's concerned about Israel marching through their nation, through their people. Balaam is allowed to leave. Balaam's allowed to leave. And he returned to his place, and Balak left also. So Balaam is apparently a renowned person. So he pronounces these things, this prophecy of the kingdom. I think it is important that we recognize that Balaam is not he's not a Jew, he's not a Hebrew, he's not a descendant of the children of promise, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not one of them. And yet he's able to pronounce this messianic prophecy of their kingdom. And that's important, right, historically, that was recognized. Because we when we read about the eschatology of, say, Mormonism, right? We read about the eschatology of Mormonism. Do you know what the eschatology of Mormonism is? They're actually somewhat premillennial in their sense, right? They believe that whatever kingdom is coming to the earth is still future. It hasn't come yet. And they're expecting it. They're expecting it to come the center of it to be somewhere here in the United States. One might think Salt Lake City or whatever, Utah. And they expect it to come in the future. Maybe to Salt Lake City, who knows? Maybe, weird places that you'd never think would be the center of anything beautiful, whatever. And they think that. Does anybody else agree with that? I can't think of any other branch of what the IRS considers Christianity, right? We use the IRS definition. It's not a good definition. It's anybody who's not a pagan, right, is a Christian. That's the IRS definition. Nobody else agrees. Roman Catholicism doesn't agree. No branch of Protestant Christianity agrees that that's the case. We would never say that Salt Lake City is prophetically significant in any way, right? Right? I didn't see any heads nod. We can all agree with that, right? It's not prophetically significant, except in the sense that it will be destroyed, by fire. We could say prophetically significant, like all the other cities, it seems like. But this is a man that is in the employ of other nations that are currently supposed to be defeated by Israel, and he stands up in the middle of those people, in the middle of those nations, and proclaims the fact that they should also expect this kingdom to arise from Israel. And that should be incorporated into their expectations of the future, and they should respond humbly to Israel's future as nations. That's geopolitically not very common, right? All right, any questions about Balaam? Balaam's gone on his way. We don't see him again for a while. He's referenced in Deuteronomy and Chronicles and 1 Corinthians, but we're not in those places. Questions, comments, observations, snide remarks? No? All right. So, chapter 25. Let me see if I can. Somehow my brothers start. Do your family do this too? My brothers started a new group chat all of a sudden this morning. And so it's been flashing in my face while I'm trying to just click on my slides. I want to be like, hey, I'm a pastor here. Why aren't you heathens in church? Or if you are in church, why are you doing this in church? Anyway. All right. Got some nice medieval illustrations here. Israel's sin. So remember, they're camping right outside of Moab. That's what precipitated all of this interaction with Balaam and Balak and all the sacrifices and all the cursings and the blessings and the donkey and all of that. So if you have your Bibles open, let's start reading in verse 1 of chapter 25. While Israel remained at Shittim, try to say that without your mama telling you to watch your language. The people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. For they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and Yahweh was angry against Israel. Now sometimes Israel playing the harlot is described in the Scripture as something of a figurative language, right? That they worshipped, they went to the temple and they went to the high places and whatever. In this case, they're actually engaging in ritual prostitution. Imagine that. There's a pagan, polytheistic prophet standing up on the mountain, on a high place, being begged to curse Israel, who's looking on the tribes of Israel and saying, your future is glorious. Your future is abundant. Your future will have plenty of water, plenty of food, plenty of places. You're going to rule over all the other nations. And all they did was park their tribes close to Moab in the wilderness. And while Balaam is saying, God has a glorious plan for you, unique among all the nations, a plan for nobody else, a plan to bless you above all other nations, to subject all other nations to you, the pagan on the mountain is recognizing this. And Israel is playing the harlot with the daughters of Moab. They are having sexual relationships with temple prostitutes in the midst of this worship. That was a very common thing. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor. That was just a local. They might have decorated him. When you go across the world into any place where Catholicism was part of the colonial history of a place, you find that they have representations of the Virgin like that. And so they'll talk about the Virgin of here and the Virgin of there. It's the same person, but they have certain decorations that go with this local representation because somebody saw it on their piece of toast or whatever, or their whatever, and so they have to make their representations of the grilled cheese Virgin over here that they saw, and they got to do. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude, but that's literally, they see a vision of what the Virgin is supposed to look like as she manifests herself here, and that's how they make her, and that becomes part of the history of that place, and that's what they did with Baal. There's actually an element of substantial syncretism to current day here in how they do this with the Virgin. And so the Baal of Peor was just how Baal was represented in Peor. And so they were worshiping there. And Yahweh was angry against Israel. Imagine that. While he's hearing his own words echo out of the mouth of Balaam off the mountain, he's watching Israel act like they're just Moabites or they're just Amalekites or whatever. So Yahweh said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before Yahweh, so that the fierce anger of Yahweh may turn from Israel." So Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Each of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor." So, this is important, guys. Israel is playing the harlot with these temple prostitutes. Yahweh commands that all of them be executed, but who is commanded to do the executing? The leaders, right? Who are the leaders of these tribes? Yeah. Grandpa, great-grandpa is supposed to take responsibility for the executions. The law gives this precedent, right? If you have a son, and it doesn't say a 6-year-old son, it could be a 40-year-old son who is rebellious and disobedient, the parents are supposed to take him to the priest and say, "This son of ours needs to be executed. He's rebellious." In this case, the patriarchs of these families were supposed to execute their family members who had engaged in this idolatrous sexual behavior. All the leaders of the people. God takes that seriously, right? What were they supposed to do? They were supposed to be occupying a land and wiping out people who are worshiping Baal. That's what they were supposed to be doing. They weren't doing it currently because they're under discipline. They're out in the wilderness. They're supposed to be teaching their sons and their daughters the proper principles of the law in order to embrace the promised blessing in the land, in order to have abundance and receive a permanent inheritance in the land and to have a kingdom on the earth. And they can't even camp for a few days by the temple of Moab without worshiping this way in the Moabite temples. And it gets worse, actually. It's not just that they went into their temples. Verse 6 says this, "Then behold, one of the sons of Israel came and brought to his relatives a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the sons of Israel, while they were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting." It may not be clear to you what he's doing. He's saying, not only have I joined myself with this temple prostitute in the temple worshiping Baal, but here she is, guys. How do you like this? Right in the middle of the assembly. the holy assembly of Yahweh. They explain they even identify her later. But they've just been told to execute large quantities of their own people. And here he is. So when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, so he's Aaron's grandson, saw it, he arose from the midst of the congregation, took a spear in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through the body. 2 for 1. So the plague on the sons of Israel was checked. So the modern snowflake gets upset about that. Don't be a modern snowflake. This is I don't know how old this illustration is. This is the illustration. Pierces one spear through them both. And what is the result? How serious does God take the sin? Well, he pronounced a plague on his own covenant people to wipe them out for this behavior. The result is, so the plague on the sons of Israel was checked, it was stopped, and those who died by the plague were 24,000. Phinehas stopped the plague. He was too late for 24,000 of them, but he stopped it. We could talk about this probably all month or more, the nature of what they were doing. There is a reason that God said, don't come in and try to modify the Canaanites' behavior. Don't come in and try to redeem their religion. Don't syncretize yourself with them. Don't make babies with them. That's very basic. But as a pastor, I get asked all the time, fairly regular, why I'm so harsh. People call it being harsh. That's what the modern snowflake calls it. When I tell them exactly the character of people they should marry. Because it matters a whole lot. Not just to God, it matters a whole lot to your happiness in life and the way you will live your life. And we focus a lot on women these days and how careful they should be with who they choose to have babies with. The same is true of men. Currently, the court system will ruin your life if you choose to have a baby with the wrong character of woman in your life. That's just the court system. If the court system doesn't do it to you, your wife can do it to you, guys, with the government's support. Be careful. Gentlemen, men, young men, most of them are my sons here, who you have a baby with. This is God's protection on his people. Wiping out 24,000 men who didn't take him seriously about who to be careful with, whom they had babies with. 24,000 of them needed to be struck dead because of the danger they were posing to the nation because they made a stupid, idiot decision to go engage in behavior that produces babies with temple prostitutes. But when I tell somebody don't date a Wiccan, but she's really hot, I don't give two craps if she's really hot. Don't care. A lot of people are like, well, I checked the box. This person says she believes in Jesus. That's actually not where I put the line. Men, young men, are you listening back there, young men? You look like you're falling asleep. You need to take this seriously. All right. You don't have to, but God takes it seriously anyway. To find somebody who's a faithful disciple of the Lord, who loves the Lord, who's walking with the Lord, not just somebody who's going to heaven when they die. I would say the same thing to women. You need not just find a warm body who's going to heaven when he dies. Find somebody who loves the Lord. And in the meantime, please stop making babies with people who aren't those kinds of people. Anyway, I have a little bit of a strong feeling about that. The blessing was brought to the nation because Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, Aaron's no longer alive. Eleazar's the high priest. The son of the current high priest came and struck these two dead, and the plague was stopped. 24,000 died. And there's more to that. Not just the blessing that was brought about. Who knows how many men did this? I don't know. But then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, and that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not destroy the sons of Israel in my jealousy. God is saying at that point, the extent of the sin that was being committed in Peor was enough to warrant the entire annihilation of these people, as he has said he would do before, right? He would just start over with Moses. He said that 3 or 4 times now. I'll strike this whole people and I'll just start over with you in your tent, man. Phinehas' behavior said he exhibited my concern. You read jealousy and you think about some 6th grade boy who just got dumped. And you think his kind of rage and anger is the kind of rage and anger that God feels. That's not it. God's concerned for their purity and their happiness and their joy. He's jealous for their experience of his promised covenantal blessings, right? It's a righteous thing. Verse 12, therefore say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his descendants after him a covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the sons of Israel. His behavior was such that the perpetual priesthood was limited then to his descendants. Aaron had multiple grandsons, right? We're out of time. We're going to do it again. Anyway, this line becomes a Zadokite priesthood. The Zadokite priesthood is what was the initial high priesthood in Solomon's temple, which is much later, and this is the perpetual priesthood that they're talking about here. But we are out of time. I'm not going to go over. But do we have questions or comments? Snide remarks? After I called people modern snowflakes, y'all aren't going to dare, are you? It's okay, I won't call you a modern snowflake, unless you are one. All right, anybody? Snide remarks, questions, comments? Nothing? Guys, this part of the Bible is weird. You know, should be on all sorts of questions. Yeah? Right. To me, it seems like he did. And the reason for that is because in one of those oracles, he said, this is my people. In other words, we don't see him going through the modern conversion process or whatever, but he seems to express profound affinity with Israel. We know that it was possible. There's a train of thought, a thread of thinking that everyone had to convert to become Jews in order to be a justified individual in the Old Testament. I don't think that's correct. But so I think he did. In our New Testament terms, we could say he became a believer. I think so. Based on what he said in those discourses. Whether he converted to Judaism or not, or became a Hebrew convert, I don't know about that. Yeah. But I won't die on that hill, right? So if you find somebody that disagrees with me, that's totally fine. They can disagree with me on that point. All right. Anybody else? All right. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word. We thank you for weird stuff in the Bible, and we thank you that you preserved that for us, and that it also demonstrates your character, and it demonstrates your concern for your covenant people. And Father, we thank you for that. And it's in your Son's name we pray.